There's a tin lunchbox on the workbench in front of me. Rust at the corners. A dent in the lid shaped like a thumb. It used to be red, back when red still meant something, and now it's the color of a penny somebody left out in the rain for 30 years. Inside it, there's a folded piece of paper. I haven't opened it yet. I know what's in there. I've known for about 26 years, the way you know there's a sore tooth on the left side of your mouth, and you keep chewing on the right. It's a marriage certificate, drawn in crayon, signed by two kids who couldn't spell lawfully, so they wrote lawfully and underlined it twice for confidence. One signature is mine, big, dumb, looping letters that go uphill at the end like I ran out of room. The other one belongs to a girl who dotted her I's with little circles. There's a date on the cider press beam, too. Carved with a pocket knife I wasn't supposed to have. The blade dull enough that it took us most of an afternoon. We were 10. We figured 10 was old enough to decide the rest of your life. My name is Mark Bevan. I'm 36. I came home to empty a house, not to keep a promise. Let me be clear about that part, because I can already feel where this is heading, and I want it on the record that I came back for boxes. Just boxes. My mom is downsizing. She found a one-bedroom near my sister's place. Ground floor, no stairs. A little patio for her tomatoes. She's not sick, and she's sad. She's 71, and she said, and I quote, "Mark, I'm tired of heating 4 rooms I don't sit in." So the house on Quarry Road is going up for sale. The house I grew up in. And somebody had to pack it. I was between tours, so I volunteered. That's the whole story, and it's the only one I came in with. A man drives back to the town he left, fills a trailer with his childhood, and drives away again before anybody asks him to stay for dinner twice. I'm good at the leaving part. I've had practice. 15 years on the road. I hang lights for live music. Rigging, trusses, the dimmers that make a sad song look the way it sounds. I'm the guy 40 feet up in the dark while you're singing along to the encore. You've never seen me, and that's the whole job. You see the song, I'm just the dark around it. 15 years, and I have never once owned a bed that was mine. Hotels with the little paper band across the toilet. Bunks on a bus. 18 inches of curtain between you and a snoring drummer. A futon in a buddy's spare room when a tour wraps, and I've got 2 weeks to kill before the next load-in. Somebody asked me once where I lived. I said, "I'll let you know when I find out." I thought that was funny. She didn't, and she was right not to. Here's a thing I learned about myself somewhere around year 6. It's easier to leave than to be left. You leave first, you're a guy with somewhere to be. You get left, you're a guy standing in a driveway watching taillights and pretending you needed the air. I never wanted to be the driveway guy. So I never planted anything. No lease longer than a season. No plant that needed watering twice. No houseplant, no goldfish, no second drawer at anyone's place. You don't put down roots if you're allergic to the part where they hold you in place. That morning, I'd been at the house since 7, working the attic. You learn things about your family in an attic. My mom kept every report card I ever got, and a shoebox of my dad's ties from before he passed, and a Christmas ornament my sister made out of a clothespin in 1991 that nobody has ever once hung on a tree. I found my old bike helmet up there, cracked down the side. I sat on a beam holding it for a while, not for any reason I could have explained to you. That's the version of me that came back down the ladder, with dust in my teeth and a list in my mom's handwriting. The list said, garage, attic, hall closet, the good dishes, donate the rest. It did not say, go get coffee at the cider mill. But my back hurt, and my mouth tasted like old newspaper. And I remembered there used to be a place at the bottom of the hill that made apple bread so good it should have been illegal. The kind of memory that lives in your stomach, not your head. Halvorsen Cider Mill, same crooked sign, same gravel lot that grabs your tires. The big sliding barn door was open, and the whole place smelled like the inside of an apple. That smell does something to you. Sweet and a little sharp. wood and sugar, and the cold morning coming off the orchard behind it. I stood in the doorway for a second, just to breathe it in. I was 9 the first time I smelled it. Some things go straight past your brain and land somewhere lower, somewhere you don't have words for. Then a voice from behind the counter said, "We're not open till 11:30. I started to say sorry, already turning to leave. And then I stopped. Because I knew that voice. I'd have known it underwater, in the dark, on the worst phone connection in the world. Nora Halvorsen. She was behind the register, with her sleeves pushed up and her hands stained the color of cider. That deep amber that gets into the creases of your knuckles and won't wash out till December. Her hair was up and falling down at the same time. There was a smudge of something on her jaw, flour or sawdust, and she hadn't noticed it, and I wasn't about to be the one to tell her. She looked at me, the way you look at a word you can almost remember. Then it landed, and I watched it land. Her whole face changed. Not into a smile yet, but into the thing that comes right before one, the loosening that makes the smile possible. "Mark Bevan," she said, flat, like she was confirming a delivery she hadn't ordered. Nora. Huh. That was it. That was the reunion. Two people who used to share a bicycle, standing 8 feet apart, saying huh at each other like a couple of barn cats. She came around the counter, wiping her hands on a rag that wasn't going to help anybody. She stopped a couple of feet away and looked me up and down, slow. The way you'd price a horse you weren't planning to buy. "You look terrible," she said. "Thank you. I drove a long way for that." "No, I mean it." She tilted her head. "You look like a man who got lost on the way to somewhere better." I laughed before I could stop it. It came out rusty, like a hinge nobody's oiled. I hadn't used it in a while, that particular laugh. "That's about the size of it," I said. She studied me a second longer. The years were in there, both of us doing the quiet math. Last time I saw her she was 19 and so was I, and there was a screen door between us, and I was already half out of town in my head before my feet had agreed to it. "You want coffee," she said. Not a question, she was already moving toward the pot. "And apple bread, if you still make it." If I still make it. She said it, like I'd insulted her grandmother to her face. "Sit down before you fall down, Bevan." So I sat. She poured the coffee into a mug that said, "World's okayest dad," which I figured was her father's, and she cut me a slab of apple bread the size of a paperback and set it down in front of me without any ceremony at all. I took a bite, and I'm not going to try to describe it. Some things you just have to know for yourself. I closed my eyes for a second and I was 9 again, sitting on the loading dock out back with my feet not reaching the ground, watching her dad work the press. When I opened them, she was leaning on the counter watching me, arms folded, one eyebrow up. "Still good?" "Still criminal," I said. That got the smile, the real one. It came and went fast, like she'd decided not to spend too much of it on me before she knew what I'd do with it. We talked for a while after that. The careful kind of talking. The kind where you trade headlines and skip the articles underneath. I told her about the house, about mom downsizing, about the trailer and the list. She told me her dad had a stroke 4 years back. He pulled through, mostly, but his left side wasn't the same after, and somebody had to run the mill, and she was the one standing closest. "So you run the mill," I said. "I run the mill." She shrugged like it was nothing, but it wasn't nothing, and we both knew it. "And I coach the middle school cross-country team. The kids are terrible. I love them." "You coach kids to run? You hated running." "I hated losing." She refilled my coffee without asking whether I wanted it. "Turns out you can teach kids to lose better than you ever did. It's a whole skill, losing well. Nobody tells you that." I looked at her hands while she poured. Cider in the knuckles, a burn scar on one wrist, old and silver and shaped like a comma. Working hands. Hands that had stayed in one place long enough to get marked by it. I felt something I didn't have a word for, and I didn't go looking for one. That's a thing I do. You never left, I said. It came out softer than I meant it to. She set the pot back on the warmer with a small click. No, she said, I never left. There wasn't any blame in it, and somehow that was worse. If she'd thrown it at me, I could have ducked. Instead, she just set it down on the counter between us, gentle, the way you'd set down a coin you weren't ready to spend. I changed the subject, because I'm good at that too. Place looks exactly the same, I said. It does not. We got a new pasteurizer in 2019. The floor's been redone twice, and the hoist over the press has been busted since March. She wiped at a spot on the counter that didn't need wiping. But sure, exactly the same. I meant the smell. She stopped wiping. Yeah, she said, quieter. The smell's the same. And for a second, neither of us said anything, and the smell did all the talking. And I think we were both 9 years old again on the loading dock, with our feet not reaching the ground, and the whole rest of our lives still folded up somewhere we couldn't see. Then she did something that changed the whole morning. She reached under the register. I heard her hand moving around back there, past the receipt rolls and the rubber bands and a spare key on a bottle cap keychain. And she pulled out something flat and stiff, and she laid it on the counter, and she slid it across to me with 2 fingers like she was raising a bet. It was laminated. Cloudy plastic, scuffed soft at the corners from years of being handled. But underneath you could still see the crayon. The big looping letters. The eyes dotted with little circles. Lawful Lee, underlined twice. The certificate. You kept this, I said. It wasn't really a question, and she didn't answer it. She just looked at me, and there was something new behind her eyes now. Half a tease and half a dare, mixed in the exact ratio that's most dangerous in a woman who's known you since before your voice dropped. You signed this, she said. She tapped the plastic right over my dumb 10-year-old signature. Right there, in crayon, in front of God and the cider press and my whole family. We were 10. You were 10. I was 9 3/4, and I took it very seriously. She leaned in on the counter, both elbows down. You promised me something, Mark Bevan. And then you got on a tour bus, and you stayed gone for 15 years, and you didn't so much as send a postcard. I opened my mouth. Nothing useful came out of it. So here's what I think, she said. She slid the certificate 1 more inch toward me. I think the kid who signed this meant every word of it. And I think somewhere between here and the highway, you decided that meaning things out loud was for other people. Nora. Prove me wrong. She straightened back up. Prove the kid who signed this didn't die on a tour bus somewhere in Ohio. The apple bread sat in my stomach like a stone. The coffee had gone lukewarm in the okayest dad mug. Outside, somebody's truck went by on the gravel, slow, and the gulls came up off the orchard in a loose handful and settled again. I should have laughed it off. That's the move, and I know it cold. You laugh, you say, those were the days. You finish your coffee. You go pack a hall closet, and you drive away with a trailer full of someone else's childhood and a clean conscience. I've made that move 100 times in 100 towns, and it has never once failed me. But she was standing there with cider in her knuckles and 26 years in her eyes, and the smell of the place had me by the collar. And for once in my life, the move just wouldn't come up out of my chest. So I told her the truth instead, not the big truth. The small one, the only one I had ready. I'm only in town 2 weeks, I said. I watched it land. I wanted it to be a wall, a locked door, a good, clean reason for both of us to let this be a nice morning and nothing more than that. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink at it. She picked the certificate back up, looked at it for a second, then set it down between us again, face up, like she was just leaving it on the table for later. 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks. Then I'm back on the road. There's a tour holding a slot for me. She nodded, slow, And then she said, the thing I have not been able to put down since. 2 weeks. A small smile. The dangerous kind. The kind that's already 3 moves ahead of you. That's funny, because 2 weeks is exactly how long it takes to find out if somebody meant something. She turned around like that settled it, and went back to whatever she'd been doing before a ghost walked into her shop, asking for apple bread. And I sat there with a cold mug in my hands and a crayon promise face-up on the counter, and for the first time in 15 years, I genuinely did not know which day I was leaving. I went back the next morning. I told myself it was for the bread. The mill sits at the bottom of Quarry Road, past the church, where the creek bends and the air goes sweet and a little rotten all at once. That smell, pressed apples and wet wood and wood smoke. I'd forgotten my whole body knew it. You don't smell a place for 15 years, and then, one morning, it's in your throat like you never left. Nora was up on a stepladder, swearing at the ceiling. The old hoist. A wooden boom, older than her father, used to lift the full pomace bins over the press. It had seized again, and the chain was hanging crooked, and a kid named Danny was standing under it, looking like the sky might fall. Don't touch that, I said. Both of them turned around. I climbed up before anybody asked me to. That's the thing nobody understands about road crew. You spend 15 years hanging half a ton of lighting over people's heads in a different city every night, and rigging stops being a job and starts being a reflex. I could see the problem from the floor. A worn shackle, a chain jumped off its track, a pulley somebody had greased with the wrong thing. I had it moving in 20 minutes. Nora stood there with her arms crossed, watching me work. And when the boom swung clean and the bin came up smooth, she didn't say thank you. She said, huh. So the tour bus didn't kill everything. Apparently not. Can you do that again on Saturday? That was how it started. A worn shackle and a chain back on its track. Nothing you'd put in a love story. By Saturday, the line was out the door. I'd forgotten what a Saturday is in this town. People come down from the ridge with empty jugs. They bring their kids and their dogs and their opinions about last year's batch. The diner sends over coffee. The fire department parks the old truck out front, because the old truck out front sells cider. Everybody knows it. The truck's been doing it since before I was born. Old men I half remember stand by the door pricing the weather. Somebody's grandmother tells somebody's grandson to hold the jug with 2 hands. The same conversations my whole childhood, just with different faces in them now. Nora ran the whole thing like a conductor who didn't need to look at the orchestra. Take the jug, pull the tap, count the change, ask about somebody's mother by name. She remembered everybody's mother. I stood at the press feeding apples and watching her remember 100 people, and I thought about how I'd spent 15 years being remembered by no one, in towns I couldn't name, and how I'd called that freedom. You're staring, she said, passing behind me. I'm working. You're staring while you work. It's a talent. A woman bought 12 jugs for a church thing, and Nora carried 6 of them out to the car herself, in the cold, in a flannel with the sleeves pushed up, and came back in rubbing her hands and grinning at nothing, and I had to look at the apples for a while. The pancake breakfast was the next weekend. The volunteer fire department does it every fall in the lot behind the station. Folding tables, a griddle the size of a door, the chief in an apron flipping cakes with a look of terrible concentration. $5 a plate, all you can eat. The money goes to a new compressor or boots or whatever broke that year. I went because Nora said go, and I stood in line behind a man who taught me 9th grade history, and he looked at me a long second and said, Bevan, boy, you're back, like I'd been gone for the afternoon. That's a small town. It doesn't ask where you went. It just keeps your seat warm and a little dusty. We sat on the tailgate of the old truck with paper plates on our knees and the orchard going gold behind the station. And she told me which kids on her cross-country team were going to be good. and which ones just needed somebody to show up at the finish line. She talked about them like they were hers. I realized she'd built a whole life out of showing up at finish lines, and I'd built mine out of leaving before the gun even went off. She taught me to run the press that week. The real press, the big one, the screw and the rack and the cloths. I flooded the floor. I want that on the record before anybody else tells it, because somebody will. You build the cheese, that's what they call the stack. Cloth and pomace and cloth and pomace. You fold the corners like a present, and then you bring the plate down slow. Slow. She said slow about 4 times. I did not go slow. I cranked it like I was striking a stage at midnight with a bus idling, and the whole stack blew out the side, and 40 gallons of fresh juice went across the boards and into my boots. Nora laughed so hard she had to sit down on the bin. 15 years, she said, wiping her eyes. 15 years rigging arenas, and a stack of apples beat you. The apples cheated. The apples have a system. You'd know that if you went slow. We cleaned it till 10 that night. Just the 2 of us. The lights off except the one over the press. A thermos of coffee that we passed back and forth without asking. You learn a person again in the small movements. Who reaches for the mop first? Who takes their coffee with too much sugar still at 35, the same as at 10? She talked while she worked the way she always had, and I listened the way I always had. And somewhere around the 2nd floor rinse, I stopped feeling like a visitor in my own childhood. At one point, she threw a wet rag at my head, and I caught it without looking. And she said, "Show off," and went back to mopping. And I stood there, holding a wet rag like an idiot, grinning at the floor. Danny stayed late that night too. Nora's little brother, 28, built like a fence post, hands like his sister's, the pressman. The kid who'd been under the hoist that first morning. He doesn't say much. He moves bins and he watches the gravity, and he keeps the whole operation from killing anybody. And he's good, genuinely good, the steadiest hand in the building. Except at noon. Because at noon, the diner sends lunch down for the crew, and 3 days out of 5 it's Priya who brings it. And every single time Priya walks through that door with a paper sack and a tray of drinks, Danny forgets how to be a person. I watched it happen on a Tuesday. She came in, she said, "Hey Danny, got your Reuben," and Danny, who can swing a 400-pound bin one-handed, dropped a wooden mallet on his own foot and said the word thanks like it was a foreign language he'd studied once. She left. He stood there holding a Reuben like it might go off. "How long?" I said. "How long what? How long have you been in love with the lunch lady?" He went the color of the apples. "She's not the lunch lady. She's a waitress at the diner. Her name's Priya." "I know her name. You said her name 3 times before she got to the door." "Shut up, Mark." 3 years, Nora called from across the floor, not even looking up. 3 years he's been dropping things on his own feet. Danny told her to shut up too, but quieter, the way you do with a sister who's right. And here's the thing I didn't expect. I looked at that kid holding a sandwich he couldn't eat, terrified of a woman who clearly liked him, frozen solid in front of the one thing he actually wanted, and I didn't think how funny. I thought how familiar. I knew that exact paralysis. I just had 36 years to get better at hiding it. He hid it for 3 years by saying nothing. I'd hidden it for 15 by leaving before anyone could ask me to stay. Same fear, different cowardice. I didn't say that to him. I just bumped his shoulder and said, "Eat your Reuben, man," and let him off the hook, because somebody had let me off the hook 100 times and I'd never once deserved it. He ate half of it standing up, watching the door like she might come back, and didn't. There was an evening that week. She took me up into the orchard to check the late trees. The light was going down behind the ridge, and the whole hillside had turned the color of a struck match. Rows and rows of trees she could name by variety and by mood. This one a shy bearer, that one a show-off, the gnarled old one at the end, Her grandfather grafted himself. She walked it like a woman walking through a room full of people she loved. Bent a branch to check the set, wiped a thumb across a leaf. The grass was wet, and the bats were starting up over the creek, and you could hear the press still ticking as it cooled in the building below us. "My dad planted this row the year I was born," she said, not really to me. "He used to say you don't own an orchard. You just look after it long enough that it starts to look after you back." I didn't say anything. I just stood there in a field somebody had been tending for 40 years and felt the full weight of every place I'd never stayed long enough to learn the name of a single tree. The reasons came out sideways, the way real ones do. Never in a big speech. Nora's came out over the press one night when I asked, careful, why a woman who runs a whole mill and coaches a whole team and remembers a whole town was still doing it solo. She didn't get defensive, she just kept folding cloth. "There was a guy," she said. "Pretty serious. Ring shopping serious. He was good to me." She squared a corner. "And then his job moved to Charlotte, and he sat me down and explained real reasonable how I'd sell the mill and we'd start fresh somewhere with better weather." Another corner. "Like the mill was a hobby. Like my dad's whole life was a thing you trade in for better weather." "What'd you say?" I said the apples don't grow in Charlotte. She finally looked at me. He thought I was joking. That was the problem. He thought the thing that made me me was negotiable. I didn't have anything smart for that, for once. Mine came out the same week, except I didn't mean to give it. We were talking about the road and she asked, "Light, didn't I ever want a place?" And I heard myself say the true thing before I could route around it. "It's easier to leave," I said, "than to be the one who gets left. So I always make sure I'm the one who leaves. I get good at the door. I've never been good at the staying." She didn't fix it. She didn't tell me I was wrong. She just nodded, slow, like I'd handed her a piece that explained the whole puzzle, and passed me the thermos, and we kept cleaning. That, it turns out, is the most romantic thing a person can do. Hand you back your worst thing without flinching, and then ask if you want more coffee. The pivot came on a Thursday. The press platform, late, everyone gone but us. We were torquing the plate down on the last load of the day, the two of us on the big wheel, and the screw was fighting us the way it does, and the cheese is built right and packed full. My hands on the iron, leaning into it, and she stepped in beside me to take the other side, and her hand came down over mine on the wheel to add her weight, and it stayed there. It stayed there longer than the work needed. Neither of us said anything. That was the thing. There was a joke right there, an easy one. I had 3 of them loaded. About how she still didn't trust me to go slow. About the certificate. About anything. And I didn't reach for any of them, and she didn't reach for any of them, and the room got very quiet around the sound of fresh juice running into the bucket below. Her hand on my hand, the smell of the apples, the one light. I turned my head, and she was already looking at me, and there was nothing teasing in it, none of the armor, just Nora at 35 with cider on her wrists. And a whole life she'd built without me, looking at me like she was asking a real question with no words on it. And I didn't joke. That's how I knew. After 15 years of getting good at the door, I stood completely still in a doorway and didn't reach for the handle. We finished the load without talking. We torqued it down together, slow, the way she'd been telling me, and it came out clean. That was the first night the certificate stopped being a joke. I drove back to the empty house on Quarry Road, with my heart going like I was 19, and I sat in the dark kitchen full of boxes and did not turn on the light. The phone rang the next morning. A number I didn't know, a voice I did. The buyer. For the house, nice woman, family of 4, exactly the right people to put kids in those rooms. She wanted to schedule the final walkthrough, get the keys signed over, close it out, make it real. 2 weeks work for you, she said. 2 weeks. I'd said it myself, standing in the cider shop like a man laying down a hand. 2 weeks and I'm gone. I'd set that clock with my own mouth, back when leaving was the only thing I knew how to be good at. And I stood in that kitchen with the phone warm against my ear, and the smell of pressed apples still on my jacket from the night before, and I understood, all at once, what I'd done. I'd started a countdown, and it wasn't counting down to the house anymore. It was counting down against the one thing I'd come home with no plans to feel, the thing that had just put its hand over mine on a press wheel and refused to let me joke my way out. Yeah, I heard myself tell her. 2 weeks' works. I hung up. I stood there. And for the first time in 15 years, I wanted to stop a clock I'd started myself, and I had absolutely no idea how. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor of my mother's half-empty kitchen with a clock I couldn't stop, and I let myself remember the part of the story I'd spent 15 years not telling. You want to know why we drifted? Everybody in that town had a theory. Distance. Bad timing. 2 kids who grew up and grew out of each other. None of them were true. The truth was smaller, and it was uglier, and it had my name on it. We were 19. It was the last week of August, the week before the apples came in. Her dad still ran the mill back then, and Nora and I climbed up onto the press platform after close with a bottle of something we'd lifted from her brother's stash, and we talked until the light in the windows went gray. And somewhere in there, it stopped being talking. Her hand was on the back of my neck. My forehead was against her forehead. And the whole world went very quiet and very loud. At the same time, the way it does right before your life is about to change. And I got scared. Not of her, of how much I wanted it, of the size of the thing that would be true if I let it be true. So I did the thing I'd spend the rest of my life getting good at. I left. I had a phone number for a sound company 3 states over, a guy who needed a kid who'd climb a truss without complaining. I took the morning bus. I didn't wake her. I didn't leave a note. I told myself I'd call when I got settled. I never called. She waited. I found that out a lot later, secondhand, the way you find out everything you were too much of a coward to be present for. She waited the whole fall, checked the mail, picked up the phone before it finished ringing. And then one day she stopped, because a person can only stand on a platform looking at the road for so long before they figure out nobody's coming back up it. So that was the wound. I'd carried it like a splinter you stop being able to feel because it's grown into you. She brought it up herself. 3 days after the buyer called. We were closing the mill on a Tuesday, just the 2 of us, the press hot and ticking as it cooled, and I made some joke about the morning bus, the kind of joke you make to test how thin the ice is. And she set down the rag she was holding. And she looked at me across that platform, the exact platform, and she said, "You really don't remember leaving, do you?" So I said I remembered. "No," she said. "You remember a version where it was easy, where you were just a kid chasing a job." She wasn't loud. That was the thing. I'd have known what to do with loud. "I made you breakfast that morning, Mark. I came down at 6, and the eggs were already in the pan because I was so sure. And you were gone. And I ate both plates standing at that window like an idiot, and I told my dad you'd call by Sunday." I didn't say anything. "You didn't call by Sunday," she said. "You didn't call by Christmas. You sent me a postcard in March. From Tulsa. It said, quote, 'This town has a terrible Italian place. You'd hate it.' That was it. That was the whole message after 8 months." I remembered the postcard. I'd meant it as a door left open. She'd read it as a man waving from a moving train. We were both right. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad," she said. And then she almost laughed, because we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "I'm telling you because you walked back in here and picked up a piece of paper we signed when we were 10. And you're treating the last 15 years like a thing that happened to you. It didn't happen to me. I was here for it. Here's the part I'm not proud of." While she was saying that, my phone was sitting face up on the press. And it had buzzed 20 minutes earlier, and I already knew what it said. I'd read it in the truck before I came in. It was from a production manager I'd worked with in Berlin. A stadium run. 6 months, 3 continents. A name act I won't say, but you'd know it. The kind of gig you spend a whole career trying to get close enough to smell. First-class freight on the lighting package. A per diem that was more than I'd cleared most whole tours. Start date in 19 days. They needed an answer by Friday. 19 days. I did the math without wanting to. The walkthrough on the house was in 2 weeks. The tour started right after. The universe had built me a ramp straight off the edge of this town, and the timing was so clean it felt like a setup. I didn't tell her about it. Not that night. And not telling her was its own kind of lie, the kind you let sit in your pocket while you talk about something else. So we talked about something else. We talked about her dad. He'd had the stroke 4 years back, and he was better now. He could walk to the mailbox and beat her at cribbage, but he couldn't run a press anymore, and they both knew it. The mill was hers now in every way that counted, and the mill couldn't move. You can't put a 100-year-old cider press in a U-Haul. You can't relocate an orchard. Her roots weren't a metaphor. They were in the actual ground, and they had names. Her dad. Danny. The dozen cross-country kids who showed up at her door every August expecting a coach who'd still be there come spring, who'd timed their splits with a stopwatch she kept on a string around her neck. I had no roots. I'd made sure of it. 15 years, and I'd never owned a bed. I used to think that made me free. Sitting on that platform, it just made me light. Light the way a thing is light when nobody's holding on to it. So we had the argument. Except it wasn't an argument because neither of us would do it the honest way. It was the quiet kind, the careful kind, the kind where every sentence has a second sentence underneath it that you're not allowed to say. I said the mill was lucky to have her. What I meant was, I don't know how to be the kind of man who stays. She said it must be nice, getting to leave whenever a town gets too small. What she meant was, please ask me to be a reason. I said I had some emails I was behind on. What I meant was, there's a way off this platform, and I can already feel myself taking it. And she heard all of it. She always heard the second sentence. That was the worst thing about her, and the best thing about her. She wiped her hands on her apron, and she looked at me with something that wasn't anger. It was tireder than anger. I can't be your 2 weeks again, she said. Plain, no build to it. Just a fact she set on the table between us, so I couldn't pretend not to see it. I'm 35, Mark. I had a guy 4 years ago who wanted me to sell all of this and follow him to Denver. And when I said no, he told me I loved a barn more than I loved him. Maybe he was right. But I'm not doing the other one again. I'm not standing at the window with 2 plates of eggs. I'd rather you never came home at all than do that to me a second time. And this was the moment. You understand. This was the exact place in the story where the man is supposed to cross the platform and take her face in his hands and say the true thing out loud while he's still scared, because that's the only time the true thing counts, while you're still scared. I went quiet instead. I just stood there and let the silence do the leaving for me, which is, if you want to know, the most cowardly thing a person can do, because it lets you keep your hands clean. I didn't say no. I didn't say goodbye. I let the quiet say it, and then I could tell myself I never actually broke anything. She nodded, once, like I'd answered, because I had. I drove back to my mother's empty house, and I sat with that buzzing phone, and I told myself I was being responsible. A grown man doesn't blow up his whole career for 2 weeks of cider and a paper certificate. That's not love. That's a midlife thing. That's nostalgia, wearing a nice coat. I had a whole speech for myself. I'd given it 100 times in 100 green rooms at 3 in the morning, and it had always worked, because there'd never been anybody in the room to argue. And then, the next night the dance happened, and a 28-year-old kid wrecked the whole speech in about 40 seconds. The volunteer fire department throws a dance every fall in the engine bay. Folding chairs, a borrowed PA, and a banner that's been the same banner since I was in grade school. The one corner still taped where it tore the year of the ice storm. I went because Nora had asked me to string the lights weeks back, before any of this. And a promise is a promise, even the small ones, especially the small ones. I'd learn that part later. Danny found me up the ladder running cable. He was sweating through a shirt I'd never seen him wear before, an actual button shirt, ironed badly, a crease down one sleeve where the iron had quit halfway. Priya was across the bay, setting out the cider cups in neat rows like she did everything. Danny had loved that woman for 3 years. 3 years of freezing solid every time she dropped off the crew's lunch. I'd ribbed him about it. I'd seen myself in it, which is exactly why I ribbed him. He stood at the bottom of my ladder and he said, real low, "If I don't ask her tonight, I'm never gonna." I told him to go ask her then. "I might throw up," he said. I said, that was about right. That's how you know it matters. And I watched this kid, this pressman with cider permanently under his nails, walk all the way across that engine bay with his hands shaking, in front of the whole town, and stop in front of Priya and say something I couldn't hear over the PA. And I watched her go still. And I watched her smile come up slow, like the light coming up over the orchard. And she said yes. She said it loud enough that 2 firemen whooped from the chili table. Danny just stood there grinning like a man who'd survived a fall off the truss and couldn't believe the ground had held. 28 years old, scared green, and he did the thing anyway. I was up a ladder with a fistful of wire, watching a kid do the one thing I'd been running from since I was 19, and the speech I'd been giving myself just died right there in my mouth. Because here's what Danny had that I didn't. It wasn't that he was sure. He told me he might throw up. He wasn't sure of anything. He just understood the part I'd somehow missed for 15 years. That meaning something out loud isn't a feeling you wait around to be certain of. It's a thing you do with your scared still in you. The scared doesn't leave first. You go first, and the scared comes along for the ride, and that's the whole deal. That's all courage ever was. It was never the absence of the run. It was keeping your feet planted while every nerve you own screamed, "Get to the bus." I climbed down off that ladder, feeling about 2 feet tall. I walked back through the mill on the way home, because I had the key and I'd left my jacket. That's what I told myself. The press was dark, the wheel a black shape in the streetlight coming through the high window. And I don't know what made me run my hand along the big oak beam over it, the one we used to dare each other to climb. But I did, and my fingers found the cut in the wood, the carving. I knew it was there. I just never really looked at it as a grown man. A date. Carved with a pocket knife by 2 10-year-olds who pressed the blade in turns because neither of us was strong enough to do it alone. I pulled out my phone and put the light on it, and I did the math. The date carved into that beam was 3 years before we signed the certificate. We didn't carve it the day we played wedding. We carved it the day her dad let us run the press by ourselves for the first time. The day we showed up at 6 in the morning, both of us, and did the work, and didn't quit when the mash jammed, and stayed until the last jug was full, and the floor was hosed, and her dad shook our hands like we were men. That was the actual promise, not the marriage. The marriage was a kid's idea of what staying looked like, lace and a paper ring. The beam was the real one. The beam said, we were the kind of people who show up at 6 and stay till it's done. And I'd carved my name into that, and then spent my whole life proving it false. Standing there with my phone light shaking on a 15-year-old splinter, I finally read the thing right. It wasn't a love note. It was an accusation. It had my handwriting on it, and it had been waiting in that wood the entire time, asking one question. Are you still that person? Did that kid live, or did he get on the morning bus and leave a body behind that just kept touring? I put my jacket on. I didn't have an answer. That was the honest part, and it scared me worse than any rigging I'd ever hung over a crowd. Nora was locking the side door when I came out. She'd seen the dance, too. She'd seen her brother do the brave thing in front of the whole town. And she looked at me in the dark of the lot, and she knew. She always knew the second sentence. The walkthrough on the house was tomorrow morning. The tour wanted my answer by tomorrow night. 2 clocks, both of them out of road, and I think she could see both of them in my face. She didn't ask me to stay. She'd already done that in the only way she had left. Instead, she stepped close enough that I could smell apples and cold air, and the cedar of her coat, and she said the one thing I'd never been able to give her. "Don't say goodbye twice, Mark." Her voice didn't shake. Mine would have. "If you're leaving, just leave. I'll survive a coward once. I won't survive him being kind about it." Then she got in her truck, and the taillights went up the hill, and I stood in an empty lot in a town I'd spent my life leaving, holding a key to a press that wasn't mine, with a carved date burning a hole in the back of my eyes. I had until tomorrow night. A house to give away in the morning, a career to take in the evening, and a promise in the wood I'd been failing since I was 10 years old. And I genuinely did not know, driving back up Quarry Road in the dark, which version of me was going to wake up in that empty house. The one who'd already booked the morning bus in his head, or the one who was finally, 15 years too late, getting tired of running toward the door. I want to tell you the version of me that woke up the next morning, because for a long time I wasn't sure I'd get to meet him. I woke up on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and a crick in my neck, and gray light coming through curtains my mother had already taken down. The morning bus didn't leave until 9:40. I knew that the way you know the time of a thing you've been planning to run for, and the walkthrough was at 8. So I went to the walkthrough. The buyers were a young couple, a teacher, and a guy who fixed boilers, with a baby asleep in one of those car seat carriers. They sat on the floor like a piece of luggage that breathes. They walked the house I grew up in. The teacher kept saying the kitchen got good light. The boiler guy knocked on walls and looked happy about what he heard. I stood in the doorway of my old room and watched a stranger measure it for a crib, and I waited to feel the thing I always felt in rooms I was leaving, that little lift, that itch toward the door. It didn't come. What came instead was a kind of quiet. I watched that couple stand in my mother's kitchen and start a life there, in the same square of light where I learned to tie my shoes, and the only thing I felt was that I wanted that. Not the house itself, but the standing still of it, the crib in the corner, the next 20 years of mornings, the slow way you wear a place down until it finally fits you. I signed where my mother told me to sign. I handed the boiler guy the trick to the side door that sticks in winter. Then I went out to my truck and sat in it and did the second hardest thing I've ever done. I opened my email and I told the tour I was out. I want to be careful here, because I've heard how these stories go, and I don't want you thinking I did it for her. I didn't write to Nora first. I didn't drive to the mill and stand in the gravel and make a speech. I sat alone in a cold truck with nobody watching. And I turned down 6 months and 3 continents, and the best money anybody had ever waved at me. And I did it before I knew whether she'd ever speak to me again. Because a thing you do to win somebody back is a transaction, and I was done making her into a transaction. I needed to find out if I could choose the staying for its own sake in an empty truck with no one keeping score. So that's how it happened. No fireworks. A man, a phone, a parking lot, and the click of sending. Then I had a new problem, which was that I had just turned myself into an unemployed person in a town with one stoplight. 15 years of climbing trusses and wiring rigs in the dark adds up to something. It is an actual skill. Somebody has to hang the lights over every county fair grandstand, and every regional fairground stage, and every fire hall fundraiser with a band. I just spent half my life thinking that work only existed at the end of a long highway. Turns out, the circuit runs right through here. Tractor pulls. The Harvest Festival. The Friday night summer concert series, 2 towns over. Stages that need a guy who can read a load chart and isn't scared of heights and shows up sober. I made some calls. By Wednesday, I had a handshake deal to be the rigging tech for the whole county fair circuit, the small regional run. The only work I actually know, close enough that I could sleep in the same bed every night. The same bed. I didn't have one of those yet either. So Thursday, I walked into the hardware store on Main, and I asked Carl, who's owned it since before I was born, about the apartment over the top of it. The ones with the slanted ceiling and the window that looks down the whole length of the street. He said it had been empty 2 years. He said the radiator clanked. He said it like a warning, and I heard it like a promise. And I signed a 1-year lease standing at his counter, between the paint shakers and the seed display. 1 year, in writing. The longest commitment I'd put my name to since I was 10 years old and holding a crayon. I still hadn't talked to Nora. I want you to understand that wasn't a strategy. I wasn't playing it cool. I was terrified. Because the mask I'd worn my whole life, the easygoing guy who's always halfway out the door, that mask is comfortable. It never loses. It can't lose because it never plays. And I just set it down in a parking lot. And underneath it, I was a 36-year-old man with a clanking radiator. And no idea if the one person I'd reorganized my entire life around still wanted me near her. So I did the only thing I had left. I went to work. The mill has a hoist over the press platform, an old chainfall that lifts the racks when they're stacked heavy with apples. It had been dead for years. Nora ran the whole operation half-crippled because of it, hauling by hand what a working hoist should have lifted in seconds. In the fall, when I was helping, I'd jury-rigged it just enough to limp through the rush. That's not the same as fixing it. A jury rig is a promise you don't intend to keep. It works until you're gone. So Saturday morning, before the sun was up, I let myself in with the key she never asked for back, and I fixed the hoist for real. New chain. Rebuilt the brake. Replaced the rotten beam bracket with steel I drove 40 minutes to buy. I greased the track and tested it loaded and tested it again. The way you test something you're going to trust other people's hands under. It took me until almost dawn. I wasn't fixing it to impress her. She wouldn't even see most of the work. I was fixing it because a man who's staying fixes the thing right, and a man who's leaving fixes it just enough. And that's where she found me. The mill door opened a little after 6, and there was Nora in her dad's old canvas coat, hair shoved up under a wool cap, holding 2 coffees, because that's what you carry when you're walking into a place you think is empty and you bring one out of habit and one out of something you won't say. She stopped in the doorway. She looked at me up on the platform with grease to my elbows. She looked at the hoist, running clean, the chain new and bright in all that old dark wood. She didn't say anything for a long second. Then she held up the second coffee. This was supposed to be for nobody, she said. Sorry to ruin your plans, I said. She came up the steps. She handed me the cup. We stood there on the press platform, in the cold, in the place where I'd lost my nerve at 19. And neither of us was 19 anymore, and the coffee was hot through the paper, and her shoulder was an inch from mine, and nobody left. I told her about the tour. That I'd already said no days ago before this, so it couldn't count as something I was trading her for. I told her about the lease and the year and the radiator. I told her about the circuit job. I told her I wasn't going to ask her to marry me. Not now. Maybe not for a long time. Because the crayon already said marry, and I'd learned the hard way that I was no good at the saying part. I was only good at the showing up part when somebody finally backed me into doing it. So I was going to do the showing up part. Every Saturday. Starting with this one. She listened to the whole thing. Then she did a thing I will think about when I'm an old man. She reached under the register, where she'd kept it for 26 years, and she took out the crayon certificate, and she peeled the lamination off it. Just tore the plastic away from the soft old paper, the plastic that had been protecting it, and also, I understood, keeping it a museum piece, a joke under glass, a thing too fragile to ever be true. She freed it, and she walked it over to the wall by the door. The wall where the cider-mill kids tape up their drawings every fall. All those crayon orchards and lopsided apples and stick figure families. And she pinned our marriage certificate up there, among them, where the kids' work goes, where the living things go. There, she said. Now it's not a relic. Now it's just one of the drawings on the wall that hasn't been finished yet. That was the whole proposal that wasn't a proposal. 2 coffees and a thumbtack. We worked the cider line that morning. The Saturday crowd came in off the cold with their jugs and their kids. And Danny ran the press with the new hoist, doing the heavy lifting and grinning every time he loaded a rack. And I poured, and Nora rang it up, and the place smelled like pressed apples and wood smoke and somebody's wet dog. And I want you to know I'm not built for this. I'm built to break a stage down at 2 in the morning and drive to the next town. But I poured cider for 4 hours in a town where everybody knew my name, and around noon I caught myself thinking about next Saturday, and the Saturday after that, and I waited for the door itch, and it just wasn't there. You wear a place down until it fits you. It was starting to fit. Danny and Priya, by the way. I should tell you how that went, because in a way it's the whole point. The fire department dance had been the week before, the night before all my reckoning, and the kid had finally taken her. He'd practiced asking her, in the walk-in cooler at the diner, talking to the lettuce. And then he'd done it for real, shaking, and she'd said yes, like she'd been waiting 3 years for him to catch up, which she had. At the dance they didn't do anything dramatic. They just danced, badly. In the engine bay with the trucks pulled out onto the apron and somebody's phone plugged into the PA. And the next morning, Priya was at the mill, dropping off lunch like she always did. Except this time, she didn't drop it and run. She stayed. She stood next to Danny at the press and learned how the rack stacking worked and got cider on her good sweater and didn't care. And there we all were on a Saturday. 2 couples, the pressman and the waitress at one end, learning each other in front of God and the whole town. The road guy and the cider mill owner at the other, 15 years late and finally on time. Nobody made a speech about it. Nobody needed to. The kid had shamed me into my own courage by doing the small, brave, ordinary thing. And now we were both standing in the same warm room with the people we'd been too scared to want out loud. And the only sermon was the smell of apples. That's the whole lesson, if there is one. It doesn't arrive as thunder. It arrives as somebody finally staying for the lunch. By the following spring, I'd worn the place down enough that it had worn me down too. The radiator still clanked. I'd stopped hearing it. I worked the fairs all summer and came home dirty and slept in my own bed and woke up in the same town, on purpose, 200 mornings in a row, which doesn't sound like much until you've spent your life never doing it once. Nora's dad got strong enough to walk the orchard rows again with a cane, slow, stopping at the trees he'd planted, and he started calling me by my first name instead of the kid who left. And one evening in May, after close, Nora and I climbed up onto the press platform the way we had at 19, except this time nobody was scared. There's a beam over the press, oak, dark with a century of apple juice, and carved into it low down where 2 10-year-olds could reach is a date. The day we signed the certificate. I'd found it again back in the fall, and it had read like an accusation, proof of a kid I'd let die. It didn't read that way anymore. Nora had her dad's old pocket knife, and she handed it to me, and she put her hand over my hand the way she had on the press wheel, the night the joke stopped being a joke, and together, slow, we carved a second date into the beam under the first one, the day she pinned the certificate to the wall. The day the road guy stayed. We carved it crooked, Because two grown adults carving with a pocket knife is no steadier than two kids. And that felt right. The boy who signed that promise didn't die on a tour bus. He just took the long way home. 15 years is a long way. But he got here, and he had the knife in his hand to prove it. I used to think a promise was a cage. A thing that holds you in place, that you make when you're young and stupid and don't know better. That the smart people slip out of and the trapped people serve. That's why I ran. I thought the running was freedom. I had it backwards. A promise isn't a cage. It's a measurement. You make it, and then you spend your whole life finding out what it was worth. And the only way you ever find out is by the person who comes back to keep it. The vow doesn't hold you. It just sits there, quiet, taking your measure year after year, waiting to see who you turn out to be. Ours waited 26 years on a piece of soft paper and a beam of old oak. And it turned out we were worth coming back for. We just had to become the people who do it. So let me ask you something before I go. What would you have done if someone handed you a promise you made as a kid and dared you to prove the kid who made it was still alive? Have you ever gone home, to the place or the person you swore you were done with, and found the thing you said you'd do still sitting there, waiting, patient, with your name already on it? I'd really like to know. Tell me your story down in the comments. Tell me about the one you ran from, or the one you came back for, or the one you're still standing on the platform about, looking at the road, deciding. I read them all. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.